Hey kids, let's talk about the good old days growing up in Idaho.
Hello everyone, and welcome to the last show in the series of Harry Hicks's young life growing up in Idaho. Yesterday, April 19th, marks the 84th anniversary of Harry and Doris Hicks, and this is the story of how they met. We begin with 18-year-old Harry in the dance hall in Salmon, Idaho, standing around with all of his buddies. Alvin Withington danced with Bonnie, and I, of course, danced once with Bonnie. Then I retired to the back of the hall where the stag line always built up. And I was talking to the boys about the girls and one thing and another, telling funny stories, and getting about ready to pop the question, anyone care for a drink? Then I noticed Wilford Hogan, that Mormon sucker, coming across the floor with a beautiful little blonde. He had his mouth twisted up in a supposed drunken leer, and he was walking in a supposed drunken swagger. I could tell he was trying to play a big shot with me, and he sneeringly introduced me to the beautiful little blonde. "Doris Brown, this is my old buddy, Harry Hicks," like a drunken slur. I gave him one look, and I saw no more of him as I gazed on the little blonde. He fell completely out of my gaze. Doris said, "You're the hardest guy to catch up with. I've been hunting you for 3 weeks and trying to get an introduction to you. I'm sure pleased that I finally caught up with you and got someone to introduce us." I stammered and stuttered. "I'm very happy to know you, Miss Brown, and would you care to dance?" I knew if I could get her to dance, that was my best solution. I thought of what I had learned one day from one of my old friends, Farnsworth. He said, "Harry, try to win a fight talking, and you will lose." Besides, I wanted to hold her close and pretend. You see, the other girls was no glamour for me because I couldn't pretend. And probably as much as anything, I wanted a chance to gain my composure and give my face and neck a chance to come back to the original color. Doris chattered on and told me she was born on the last of September, and those people born under the September 30th Libra sign was talkers, and they may blurt out anything. I was glad she told me that, for she kept up a steady stream of language, thankfully. I think she knew how hard it was for me to speak. She told me how her family had come to this salmon country just like pioneers in this day and age. The whole family with teams and covered wagons, and the boys driving the horses and mules and all their cattle along behind, while Ma Brown and Kurt and Doris, Lola and Louise and little Chuck, the baby, came on ahead in a Model T Ford and camped up on the bar by Jesse Creek, because they knew the Parmenters. "Do you know Ralph and Frank Parmenter?" she asked. I told her yes, they are the only Mormon friends I have. "Now you have 3, she said, "because you forgot to count me, and if you count my mother, you'll have 4. I said, "I don't know your mother." "Well, she knows you because I told her about you. Told her I was going to marry you, so there." "Well," I said, "if that is so, you'll have to not be scared of me, because no one that I like is scared of me, because I will not hurt anybody I like." We finished the dance talking and joking happily, and I lost my fear of her, and was able to talk with her more easily. After this dance, there's something I have to do, so I'll leave you for a little while. "What are you going to do? Can't I go with you?" she asked. I said, "No, I'll be right back. I'm going to get rid of some Seagrams and feed Hogan's goat some sloe gin." "What's that? What's that?" she cried after me. Well, I caught Wilford Hogan on the way out to the car, and I said to Wilford, "Since you're such a nice boy to introduce me to that what's-her-name girl, I'm going to give you a bottle of wine. It's called sloe gin. You got to drink a lot because it's slow to take hold. I figured since you're drinking anyhow, it won't be noticeable the way you can hold your liquor. So I gave the fifth of sloe gin to Hogan, and taking the Seagrams out of my pocket, I passed it to Alvin, and told him I didn't want it. I was going to sit in the car all evening with the girl, and when he wanted the car, we would all go home. Then I went back to see if the beautiful blonde Doris was just teasing me or not. She was waiting for me and consented to go out and sit in the car and get acquainted. Just at that time, the band played The Waltz You Saved for Me. We danced it, holding each other closely. Then I loved her and remembered my prayer, where I asked God if he would send me an angel. And as we went out the door arm in arm, I saw Wilfred Hogan swilling that sloe gin like it was going out of style. I thought to myself, I'd hate to have your head in the morning. That song, The Waltz You Saved for Me, became Doris's and my dance ever after. We sat in the car and talked, and when Alvin came out to take Bonnie home, we got out and I walked Doris home, after having a hamburger, about all I could afford at that time. We talked all evening about horses and dogs and cattle. She was one of a family of 8 and a cowpuncher's daughter. She told me about the bull pastures over in Wyoming, and her father and mother, and especially how proud she was to be a good Mormon. And I was to be a pretty good Mormon too, but it was to take 50 years to do that. I guess you can say we had a usual courtship of 2 people very much in love. The thrill of the first kiss, it has never worn off. The first time I accidentally brushed my hand against her breast, and many loving, tender times that was to be ours through the years. Well, we met on Thanksgiving and had our first date on Christmas. When I was to meet her mother and father, she said, "This is the man I'm going to marry." And that's before we ever talked about marriage, since the first time she spoke of it. Her mother, Mrs. Brown, was making carrot pudding for Christmas dinner, and insisted that I take a bite. It was an old family favorite, not unlike plum pudding. I have since learned to like it very much, and my wife carries on the tradition, although hers is some sweeter than that pudding of Ma Brown's. She treated me very reserved and quiet, and I was mannerly and polite. She gave me a taste of that pudding. Although it was not quite sweet enough for me, I said it was very good. The Brown's house had a very peaceful atmosphere. Just the mother, my girl, and the baby on the floor. But Doris kept up a very interesting conversation about the family and their likes and dislikes. I could tell that she worshipped her father, as she had a father image of him ever after. It seems that day her father was up to the timber, getting a load of wood, and they were expecting him back at any time. It was early in the evening when he finally came in, and she immediately threw herself in her father's arms, and he was very boisterous, and began to tease her and play, like fathers play with their daughters, fun but reserved. I expect she was showing off for my benefit. Finally, her brothers, Scott, Jim, Larry, and Dale, came in. After they all took a turn at teasing her or pinching her, I noticed they were all a quite loving family, and didn't care who knew it. But I noticed the boys all reserved the dignity of their sister, although their teasing seemed to anger her somewhat. I knew it was all a put-on. Then she formally introduced me to her father as Boone Brown. His name is really Achilles, but folks call him Chill or Boone. It seems he had earned the name of Boone because the family thought of him as a frontiersman. Then she introduced me to her brothers. There was Scott, Jim, Larry, and the small one about 8 or 9 years old. Then her dad Chill said, "Now, to go with my daughter, you got to whip me, or Scott, with the boxing gloves." And Jim immediately brought a pair out to me. It seemed that this was his way of getting acquainted. This whole boxing idea pleased me to no end, as I was proud of my ability, and was only happy to show Doris how good at fighting I was. I grinned and laughed all over to scare them, and even did some fancy footwork, and boxed a few steps, and flicked my nose like boxers do. I chose to fight Scott, as they knew I would, because it would not do to take a chance on making a fool of her dad, and I knew she would only make fun of Scott. Scott was a husky boy, just a little shorter than I, about the same weight, and quite a harmful-looking gent. He had a slight overbite that made him look like a bulldog. I was laughing and grinning and acting as though I was anxious to get the gloves on, like I was a little punchy. "I'll fight Scott, I'll fight Scott," I said, and the other boys was helping Scott get the gloves on. Grinning all the time like the cat that got the cream, I knew what they were thinking. "We'll show this Idaho feller how we grow 'em over in Wyoming." Well, we started in, I sparring around the floor a little to let Scott set the pace. I always let the other man set the pace, so I'll know how hard to hit. I actually never hit anyone as hard as I could. It would probably kill him. Anyway, Scott began like he was going to finish me up quick, swinging as hard and as fast as he could. That is the easiest kind of fighter. I could not take the same procedure, as if I did, I would down him in one flurry. So I decided to keep him pushed off and let him hit nothing but arms and elbows, which he did. I speared him with an easy left once in a while to spur him on, and as I expected, he soon tired and set into swinging harder and harder. Then I made him furious by stepping by his right side when he would miss me on the inside, by a big haymaker right, and stepping behind him, turning at the same time, I would tap him on the shoulder or the back of the head and say, "Here I am." That really flustered him. Well, Scott never laid a glove on me. I boxed and fought a lot in the CCC camps, where I would meet all comers every eve, and I never lost a fight. I could duck inside of pretty much any blow, and if I could see that I was going to take a blow, and if I could see it was going to be a hard one, I would get close up to the blows so it was not at the furthest reach when it hit me. This will ruin the effect of any good punch, as any good boxer knows. I could be quite a clever boxer for a short time, but actually I would soon get disgusted with the dancing and toe work and pecking at someone like a ballet dancer. It was actually more to my liking to be a straight-up bare-knuckle fighter and be forceful. I would make feints or back off, and was up to something to get an opponent to set a pattern. Then bingo, I'd suddenly break that pattern. I invented what they called Harry's corkscrew. I'd throw that 4 to 5 times. It would do no harm to anyone. Then I would start another one, but I'd let my arm fall to my side and bring a hard uppercut to their solar plexus, or right near under the heart. I knew how to throw an effective punch, and every punch I threw, you could peg a name on it, and it was effective. Poor old Scott never had a chance with me, but that day I let him off fairly easy. You know, come to think of it, while I'm talking about fighting, I gotta say, the boys growing up nowadays do not learn to fight anymore. For example, one time I watched a fight by a couple of, I'd say, 20-year-olds. They'd run in and slap at each other like girls. I swear, damn, it made me want to throw up. When finally one of them hit the other with a solid right jab, he started to cry and said, "I didn't mean it, honest. I didn't mean to hit you." I just couldn't believe my eyes. My dad was considered one of the toughest fighting men in the country, and I whipped him easily at 19, and he never could even hit me. The last time we got into a fight, he got so flustered, he ran in the house and got the .30-06 and was going to shoot me. Mom and I took the gun away from him and helped him calm down. Those were the days. Well, enough said about that. I'll not linger on that any longer. After I finished with taking care of Scott in the boxing match, and after Doris played with the family for some time, we went on about 3 blocks up the street and 1 block over, and I introduced Doris to my mother and father. They liked her. Dad didn't say much to her, just grinned and winked at her, but she liked my mother very much. And that's how Doris and me fell in love. Not long after that, we were married, on April 19th, 1935. I love this story. How many men do you know nowadays that would meet the parents after falling in love with some sweet young woman and then be challenged to fight the father or one of the older brothers of that young woman? Never happened to me or anyone else I know, but it happened to Harry. Everything happens to Harry. And this finishes the story of Harry Hicks growing up in Idaho. You know, I remember sitting in Grandpa Hicks's living room as we watched the great Muhammad Ali. Grandpa figured Ali was the greatest, just like Ali figured. And who was I to argue? He really could box. As we sat and watched, Grandpa would analyze every single move Ali made and let me know if he approved of it or not. As I mentioned earlier, Grandpa was the champion boxer of his CCC camp, and he never passed up a chance of fighting anyone. He was full of stories about beating the hell out of anyone who looked crossways at his beautiful blonde Doris, and one time he took on the famous fighting man at the state fair and beat him into oblivion, as Grandpa put it. Those were the days of heroics, when men stood on principle, and if you insulted or disrespected a man, you could usually expect to get punched in the jaw. And this wraps our show for the day. By the way, if anyone would like to have their story featured on this podcast, Growing Up in Idaho, just email me the script with all the details. Thanks for listening. Thanks for listening. Growing Up in Idaho, the good old days.